My husband started sneaking into my granddaughter's room in the middle of the night, so I decided to put a camera in to find out why. I first saw him on a Thursday night, about a week after I'd gotten back from a long business trip. I was in bed, tossing and turning, my head just spinning, worrying about why my granddaughter was acting so strange, when I heard the soft creak of our bedroom door. I froze. I held my breath, and in the dim light saw Bernard's silhouette slip out silently. My heart leaped. I just laid there, paralyzed, listening to his light footsteps in the hall, and then the nearly silent click of Naomi's bedroom door closing. A chill went right down my spine. And that right there? That was the moment the panic started to set in. But for you to understand why that scene terrified me so much, to the point where I started to suspect the man I slept next to, I need to back up a bit. Let me introduce myself properly. My name is Sylvia, and if you're just starting to hear my story, you should know it comes from a deep place in my heart. I'm 58 years old. I own my own consulting firm, and I live in a quiet house in the suburbs of Chicago, Illinois. My life took a sharp turn a few years ago when my only daughter and my son-in-law died in a terrible car accident. By some miracle, my granddaughter, Naomi, survived. Ever since then, she's lived with me. For 10 years, I've also shared my home with my husband, Bernard. He's retired, and he's not Naomi's biological grandfather, but I had hoped, with all my heart, that he loved her as if she were his own. What I'm about to tell you is something I never imagined could happen under my own roof, while I was away on business, working to give my granddaughter the best life possible after everything she'd already been through. Sometimes we think we know the people we sleep next to, but there are dark secrets that only come to light when we're at our most vulnerable. If you're connecting with my story, please hit that like button. To bring a little strength to this grandma's heart, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss my next stories. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love knowing what part of the country or the world is keeping me company. It all started when I noticed the change in Naomi's behavior. She'd always been a sweet girl, despite the tragedy, the kind who would draw pictures for me and give me the tightest hugs when I came home from a trip. My granddaughter was a resilient little light. At least, that's how I remembered her. It was after a longer business trip, almost 3 weeks away, that I realized something was different. The conference in San Francisco had been a success. I closed 2 major contracts. I was exhausted, but happy. The whole flight back to Chicago, the only thing keeping me awake was the image of Naomi's smiling face. I just wanted to get home, smell her sweet scent, and hear her stories from school. When the taxi finally pulled up in front of our red brick house, I felt a huge sense of relief. Bernard opened the door before I even rang the bell, greeting me with a quick kiss. "Welcome back, honey." "Tired?" "Exhausted," I admitted, dragging my suitcase inside. "Where's my princess?" "In her room. I think she's drawing. Let her finish. Dinner's almost ready." I thought it was strange. Normally, Naomi would be at the door, jumping into my arms. I left my things right there and went to her room. The door was ajar. "Sweetheart, Grandma's home." She was sitting at her desk, her back to me. When she turned around, there was no smile. She stood up and came to hug me, but it was a tense, quick hug. She felt like a little soldier carrying out an order. When I pulled back to look at her, I noticed the dark circles under her eyes. They were deep, purplish, and her gaze, it was empty. Her little light had gone out. "Is everything okay, my love?" I asked, concern already creeping into my voice. "Yeah, Grandma," she answered quietly, looking away. Bernard popped his head in the doorway. "Oh, she's been like that for a few days. A little quiet. It's just a phase, you know? Come on. Dinner's getting cold." During dinner, I watched her. She barely touched her food, always with her head down. The strangest part was that every now and then, she'd shoot a quick, frightened glance at Bernard, as if she was afraid of doing something wrong. I tried to make conversation, asking about school, about her friends. The answers were one word: fine, yeah, no. And with every question I asked, I could feel Bernard's heavy, controlling stare on her. After dinner, I went to put her to bed. I needed a moment alone with her. I sat on the edge of her bed, in the quiet room lit only by a little fairy lamp. "My angel," I started, taking her hand. You know you can tell me anything, right? Grandma will always protect you. She was silent for a long moment, her little eyes fixed on the quilt. Then she squeezed my hand with a strength that surprised me and looked directly into my eyes. The fear I saw there was so tangible, so deep, it took my breath away. In a shaky, almost inaudible whisper, she said the words that would be the start of my nightmare. She said, "Grandma, don't tell Grandpa Bernard I talked to you." My blood ran cold. "Talked about what, sweetheart? What do you want to tell me?" My voice was an urgent whisper. Before she could answer, Bernard's shadow appeared in the doorway. "Time for bed, Naomi. School's early tomorrow." My granddaughter's body flinched like a dried leaf, an instinctive movement of someone expecting a blow. She turned to the wall, her back to me, and I understood our conversation was over. Bernard's presence was an invisible barrier, but stronger than any wall. I kissed her forehead, feeling the cool, damp skin under my lips. "Good night, my love," I whispered, trying to put all the security I didn't feel into my voice. I left the room, passing Bernard in the hall. He smiled at me, a smile that now looked like a mask. "She loves a bit of drama, doesn't she? Good night, honey." I just nodded, unable to form a word. I went to our room and got ready for bed, acting as normal as I possibly could. But my head was a whirlwind. Her words echoed over and over. "Don't tell Grandpa Bernard." What kind of secret could a 9-year-old have that would make her so afraid of the man who was supposed to protect her? I lay in bed and closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. I just laid there in the dark, listening to the heavy breathing of Bernard beside me, who fell asleep in minutes. Every creak of the house put me on high alert. I replayed the last few days in my mind, trying to connect the dots. The dark circles, the silence, the scared look at dinner. It wasn't just a phase, it was fear. I traveled peacefully, knowing she was with a trusted babysitter, Mrs. Gable, during the day, and with him, a retiree, at night. I could just feel it in my gut, an ache that told me my trust had been completely misplaced. The hours dragged on. Midnight, 1 in the morning. I had given up on sleep when I felt a subtle movement in the bed. I opened my eyes a crack and saw Bernard getting up. He moved with a care that wasn't natural, like a thief in his own home. I watched, breathless, as he put on his robe and left the room, closing the door behind him without a sound. My heart started pounding out of control. Where was he going? I waited a few seconds that felt like an eternity, and got out of bed. The house was sunk in a deep silence. I went to our bedroom door and opened it with the utmost care. The hallway was dark, lit only by the small nightlight near the floor. And then I saw it. The door to Naomi's room, which I was sure I had left just ajar, was now completely closed, and underneath it, a thin sliver of light. He was in there. A cold panic washed over me. A million horrible scenarios flashed through my mind. I just stood there, in the middle of the hall, my feet frozen to the cold floor, not knowing what to do. Should I go in? Should I scream? What if I was wrong? What if he was just checking on her, like a concerned grandfather would? But Naomi's whisper came back to me. Don't tell him. Time stretched on. 5 minutes, 10, 20. It felt like a lifetime passed as I stood there, tortured by my own imagination. Finally, after what seemed like 30 endless minutes, I heard the click of the latch. The sliver of light disappeared and the door opened. I quickly stepped back into the shadow of my bedroom doorway, my heart in my throat. Bernard came out, looked both ways down the hall, and started walking back to our room. He didn't see me. As soon as he passed, I stepped out of the shadow and called his name. My voice came out shaky, but firm. "Bernard?" He spun around, and I saw the shock in his eyes. He wasn't expecting me to be awake. For an instant, his face went pale. "Sylvia, what are you doing up? Is something wrong?" he asked, trying to sound casual. I walked toward him, stopping a few feet away. "I should be asking you that. What were you doing in Naomi's room at this hour?" He blinked, quickly composing himself. A condescending smile played on his lips. "Oh, that. I was just checking to make sure she was sleeping soundly because of the nightmares she's been having. She woke up a little fussy earlier, so I stayed in there to soothe her back to sleep. That's all." The excuse was perfect, reasonable. The excuse of a loving grandfather. But I didn't believe it. Not after the look of terror in my granddaughter's eyes, not after her warning. I looked into his eyes, searching for any sign, any crack in his facade. But he held my gaze, his face a mask of concerned innocence. "She didn't tell me anything about nightmares," I said, my voice low. "I didn't want to worry you while you were away. You have enough on your plate with your business," he replied, now with the tone of a man being unjustly accused. I didn't say anything else. I just went back to the room and got into bed, turning my back to him. He came in a moment later, lay down, and within minutes his breathing was heavy again. But I knew I wouldn't sleep again that night. He was lying. And if he was lying about that, what else was he lying about? The night wasn't over. For me, it had barely begun. I lay in that bed, motionless, feeling the weight of Bernard's body beside me. His breathing, which for 10 years had been the sound that lulled me to sleep, now sounded like the bellows of a monster. Each inhale and exhale felt like a countdown to something terrible. I pretended to sleep, but my eyes were burning in the darkness, my mind racing in circles, trying to make sense of what made no sense. He was lying. The calmness in his voice, the ease with which the excuse rolled off his tongue. It was rehearsed. That was the behavior of someone with something very serious to hide. When the alarm went off at 6 a.m, I was already exhausted, as if I hadn't slept in days. I got up and started the routine on autopilot, the mask of normalcy firmly in place. I made the coffee. Bernard came downstairs, already dressed, whistling some random tune. "Morning, honey. Sleep well?" he asked, giving me a kiss on the forehead. His touch made my skin crawl. I had to fight the urge to pull away. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile, like a baby. We sat down for breakfast. Naomi came down soon after, already in her school uniform. She didn't say good morning. She just sat down, took a piece of toast, and started eating in silence, her eyes glued to her plate. "So, Naomi," Bernard said with a cheerful voice that sounded grotesquely fake to me. "Did you dream about colorful ponies again?" I saw my granddaughter stiffen. She just shook her head no, without looking at him. "Oh, too bad. Her nightmares are going away, see, Sylvia? I told you, it was just a phase," he continued, giving me a wink. The coffee tasted like ash in my throat. I wanted to scream. I wanted to confront him right then and there, in front of her. But Naomi's warning echoed in my mind. "Don't tell Grandpa Bernard I talked to you." She was afraid of him. And if I confronted him without proof, without a plan, I could make things worse for her. I could somehow leave her even more vulnerable. So, I swallowed my rage along with my coffee and played along. "That's good. I feel much better," I said, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. The rest of the morning was torture. I drove Naomi to school. In the car, I tried to talk to her again. "Sweetheart, if you don't want to talk, that's okay. But Grandma wants you to know that I love you more than anything in this world. And nothing, absolutely nothing, is more important to me than you." She was silent, looking out the window. But before she got out of the car, she turned and gave me a hug. A real hug, tight, desperate. It only lasted a few seconds, and then she whispered in my ear, "I love you too, Grandma." And she ran off into the school. I spent the day in my home office, unable to concentrate. I canceled 2 phone meetings. I just stared at the closed door, knowing Bernard was in the living room, watching his TV shows, acting like the harmless retiree I thought he was. The image of him in the hallway the night before wouldn't leave my mind. Later, when Naomi got home from school, the same quietness settled in. Bernard helped her with her homework at the kitchen table, and I watched them from a distance. It all looked so normal, so perfect, and that's what scared me. In the afternoon, Bernard announced he was going to Walmart to buy some tools for the garden. As soon as I heard his car pull out of the driveway, I felt an immediate sense of relief. I went to the living room, where Naomi was watching a cartoon, but not really paying attention. "Honey, how about we make those chocolate chip cookies you love?" She shook her head. "I don't feel like it, Grandma." "Okay." I sat next to her, but the space between us felt like a chasm. I had to do something. I felt like I was losing my granddaughter, that she was drowning in silence right in front of me. I turned off the TV. I went to her room with a sudden need to tidy her things, to touch her belongings, as if that could connect me to what she was feeling. The room was impeccably neat. Bernard was methodical about household organization, and Naomi's room was a reflection of that. The bed made, the toys lined up on the shelf, the books stacked by size on her desk. But the order felt cold, impersonal. It didn't feel like a 9-year-old's room. It looked like a showroom. I started arranging her clothes in the closet, refolding pieces that were already folded. It was a pretext. I was looking for something, anything, without even knowing what. A note, a different kind of drawing, a diary, any clue that could give me some insight. That's when my eyes were drawn to a small gap under the bed. There was something there, shoved up against the wall. I knelt down, my heart starting to race. I reached under and pulled the object out. It was an old teddy bear. My chest tightened. I recognized it immediately. It was Barnaby, the bear my daughter, Naomi's mom, had since she was a little girl. He was old, worn, with one button eye missing, but Naomi loved him for that very reason. She used to say he had the best stories. I held the bear in my hands, and a wave of sadness washed over me. I hadn't seen him in months. Naomi used to sleep with him every single night. I thought she had put him away, like kids do when they get a little older. But he wasn't put away. He was hidden. I ran my fingers over the rough, worn fur. That's when I felt it. Something was wrong. I turned the bear over and my stomach lurched. The seam on Barnaby's back was completely torn, a violent rip from top to bottom. The cotton stuffing was coming out, and amidst the yellowed cotton, there were stains. Dark, stiff stains. I brought the bear closer to my face, the light from the window illuminating the details. There was no doubt. They were tear stains, and not just a few. It was soaked through like she'd cried into it night after night, and the fur and stuffing had gone all stiff, like cardboard. The image formed in my head with terrifying clarity. Naomi, crying in silence, her face buried in the bear's back to muffle the sobs. Crying so hard she had ripped her plush friend, her last link to her mother. Why would she do that? Why would she need to muffle her crying? A cold, sharp anger began to rise up my spine. It was an anger unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't explosive. It was icy, focused. Bernard. It had to be him. This man was making my granddaughter cry until she tore her most precious toy apart and cry in silence, afraid of being heard. With trembling hands, I put the bear back exactly where I found it. I couldn't let Bernard know I had found it. This was my first piece of physical evidence. Silent and devastating proof. That night, the charade continued. We had dinner. Bernard talked about his day, about the price of tools, about the neighbor. I answered in monosyllables, my mind miles away. I looked at Naomi, who ate her small portion, and all I could see was the torn teddy bear. How many nights had she spent clutching it, crying in secret? When it was time for bed, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to sleep. I was no longer going to lie in bed waiting for a sound. I was going to watch. I said goodnight to Naomi, a longer, tighter hug. "Grandma loves you so much," I whispered into her hair, and I felt her little body tremble for an instant. I went to my room with Bernard. I waited for him to fall asleep, which didn't take long. His breathing became heavy, rhythmic. With my heart pounding against my ribs, I got out of bed with the care of a wild animal. I didn't put on a robe. I went barefoot so as not to make a sound. I didn't go to the hallway. I went to the guest room, which was across the hall, almost directly in front of Naomi's room. The door had a crack that, if I positioned myself at the right angle, gave me a clear view of her door. And then I waited. Time crawled by in the darkness and silence of the house. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound of a car on the street made my body jump. My eyes burned with fatigue, but I didn't blink. I was hunting, and I wasn't going to give up until I saw my prey. I didn't have to wait long. Around midnight, my bedroom door opened. Bernard's silhouette appeared, framed against the darkness. He stopped, looked one way, then the other, and then tiptoed to Naomi's door. He turned the knob with torturous slowness and slipped inside, closing the door behind him. This time, I didn't just stand there. The discovery of the torn bear had lit a fuse inside me. Fear had given way to an icy determination. As soon as Naomi's bedroom door closed, I slid out of the guest room, my bare feet barely touching the hardwood floor. The hallway seemed a mile long in the dim light. Every step was calculated, silent. My heart was beating so hard, the sound seemed to fill the quiet house. A war drum announcing the battle that was about to begin inside me. I stopped in front of her white bedroom door. The wood felt cold under my palm. I wanted to break it down, to burst in screaming, to drag that man out of there. But the image of the fear in Naomi's eyes held me back. If I made a scene, he could play the victim. He could say I was crazy, hysterical. He was a master of manipulation, I was beginning to realize. I needed something concrete, something no one could deny. So, I did the only thing I could. I pressed my ear against the cold wood of the door. I held my breath, trying to filter out the sounds of the house and focus only on what was happening inside. At first, I only heard silence. A heavy, tense silence that told me Naomi wasn't sleeping. A minute passed. 2. I could hear my own blood pulsing in my ears. Then, I heard it. It was a low, almost imperceptible sound. A muffled cry. A choked sob, the kind of cry from someone desperately trying not to make noise. The memory of the torn bear echoed in my mind. It was the sound of silent suffering. My stomach clenched. My nails dug into the wood of the door. I had to hold myself back from screaming her name. Then, his voice cut through the crying. It wasn't the gentle, fatherly voice he used in front of me. It was a cold voice, devoid of any emotion. A hissing whisper loaded with a cruel authority. "Discipline," he said. The word floated through the air and hit me like a punch. "It's for your own good." Discipline? What kind of discipline required a child to cry in secret in the middle of the night? What kind of good was this that snuffed out the light in a little girl's eyes? The pieces began to fall into place, forming a monstrous picture. The nightmares he mentioned. They weren't dreams. They were his visits. I couldn't hear any more. I backed away from the door, my body trembling with rage and disgust. I went back to our room, feeling my way through the darkness like a blind person. I got into bed, as far away from him as I could get, on the very edge of the mattress. His scent on the pillow made me nauseous. I lay there, my eyes wide open, staring at the dark ceiling, until I heard the bedroom door open again. He came in, silent as a ghost, and got into bed. I didn't move. I kept pretending to be asleep, my body rigid as a statue. I felt the mattress dip with his weight, and a few minutes later, his breathing became heavy again. He was back asleep, peaceful, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just psychologically tortured a child. At that moment, lying next to the monster I didn't know, a decision formed in my mind. It wasn't an emotional, impulsive decision. It was a cold, calculated decision, born of rage and the absolute need to protect my granddaughter. I would no longer operate in the dark. I would no longer depend on whispers and torn teddy bears. I was going to bring the light into that room. I was going to expose the truth, no matter how ugly it was. The next morning, the normalcy was even more unbearable. At breakfast, he played the part of the perfect grandfather, asking Naomi about her day at school, offering to help her with a science project. And I, the most dedicated actress in the world, smiled and played along with the farce. "Honey, I need to go downtown today," I announced, after taking a sip of my coffee. "I need to buy some new equipment for the office. A scanner, maybe a bigger monitor." "Sure, sweetheart. Want me to go with you?" he offered, all helpful. "No, that's okay," I said quickly. "I'm going to take care of some things at the bank, too. I'd rather go alone." The excuse was perfect. He suspected nothing. As soon as I dropped Naomi off at school, I didn't go to an office supply store. I drove straight to an electronics store specializing in security equipment, one of those places you only see in movies. I walked in, my heart pounding. A young salesman came to help me. "Good morning, ma'am. Can I help you?" "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need a spy cam, the smallest, most discreet one you've got, one that I can monitor from my cell phone." The salesman looked at me for a second, maybe expecting a story about a thieving employee or a cheating husband. I gave him none. My face was a mask of determination. He nodded and led me to a section in the back of the store. "We have this one," he said, showing me a tiny black box smaller than a sugar cube. "It's a high-definition camera with night vision and motion detection. The battery lasts for weeks on standby, and you can access the live image and audio from anywhere through an app." It was perfect. "I'll take it." I left the store with the small box in my purse, which now felt like it weighed a ton. It wasn't just a camera. It was my weapon. It was the only way I could be in that room with Naomi, even when I was miles away. It was the eye that would see what he did in the darkness, the silent witness that would give me the ammunition I needed. From that moment on, the hunt had officially begun, and I wasn't going to stop until the truth was revealed and he paid for every single one of my granddaughter's silent tears. The drive home was the longest of my life. The little box in my purse seemed to pulse, a mixture of hope and terror. Every red light was torture, giving me more time to think about what I was about to do. Spying on my own house, my own husband. It felt like a betrayal, but the image of the torn bear and the sound of Naomi's muffled sobs reminded me that the real betrayal was happening right under my nose. I wasn't betraying my marriage. I was fighting for my granddaughter's soul. I got home and Bernard was in the living room watching a golf game on TV. He barely looked up. "Back already? That was quick." "The store didn't have the monitor I wanted. I'll have to order it online," I lied, walking past him as if I were in a hurry. "I'm going to put these things in the office." I went upstairs, my heart in my throat. With every step, I feared he would call me, ask what was in the bag, but he was absorbed in the game. In the office, I locked the door and took a deep breath for the first time. I opened the box with trembling hands. The camera was even smaller than I remembered. It came with a small instruction manual and a USB cable. I sat on the floor and read the manual from cover to cover, twice. I downloaded the app on my phone, synced the camera, tested the image. The quality was surprisingly sharp. The audio was clear. I could see and hear everything in my office through the tiny lens. Now came the hardest part, the installation. I needed a pretext to go into Naomi's room and have enough time to position the camera without anyone seeing me. The opportunity came after lunch. "Naomi, honey, I was thinking, that bookshelf of yours is a mess. How about we tidy it up together? We can set aside the books you've already read to donate." To my surprise, she agreed, perhaps eager for any activity she could do with me. Bernard was still in the living room, dozing on the couch. It was my chance. We went to her room. As she sat on the floor, making piles of books, my eyes scanned every inch of the room, looking for the perfect spot. It had to be a place with a clear view of the bed and the door, but that was completely discreet. The bookshelf was ideal. It was a white shelf full of books, stuffed animals, and small decorative objects. "Grandma, look at this one," Naomi said, showing me a book of fairy tales we used to read together when she was younger. "How beautiful, my love. Keep that one." "It's a memory," I said, my brain working a mile a minute. While she was distracted with the books, I picked up a small ceramic vase that was on the top shelf, one of those that kids make in school. It was opaque and held plastic flowers. With my heart pounding, I took the camera out of my pocket. It was black and would be perfectly camouflaged in the shadow of an object. With a trembling hand, I positioned the camera behind the vase, among the plastic flowers, adjusting the angle so that the tiny lens had a panoramic view of the room. I tested the image on my phone, which was in my pocket. Perfect. The view was complete, from the door to the bed. "There," I said, with a cheerfulness I didn't feel. "The shelf looks beautiful and organized." We left the room and I breathed a sigh of relief. The eye was in place. The trap was set. Now, I needed the bait. That night, at dinner, I launched my plan. "I got an email today," I started casually. "I need to go to Dallas for 3 days, a last-minute meeting with an important client." I saw Naomi's fork stop inches from her mouth. Her shoulders, which had been relaxed, instantly slumped. She didn't say anything, but I saw the light in her eyes flicker and go out again. The fear returned, quick and overwhelming. Across the table, Bernard nodded. "Really? So suddenly?" he asked. "Yeah, but it's an opportunity I can't miss. I'm leaving Tuesday morning and coming back Thursday night." The rest of dinner was silent. Later, when I went to put Naomi to bed, Her distress was palpable. As soon as the door closed, she clung to me with desperate strength. "Grandma, do you really have to go?" Her voice was a choked whisper, her face buried in my waist. "Can't you call and say you're sick?" That broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. I wanted to scream that it was all a lie, that I wasn't going anywhere, that I would never leave her alone again. But I had to see it through. I knelt down and held her by the shoulders. "My angel, I have to go. It's Grandma's job. But I promise it'll go by fast. And I'll call you every night before you go to sleep. And I'll bring you a beautiful present from there. What do you think?" Tears streamed silently down her face. She didn't say anything else. She just nodded, defeated. I tucked her into bed and covered her up. "I love you, sweetheart. More than the stars in the sky. I love you too, Grandma," she whispered into her pillow. On Tuesday morning, the charade continued. I packed my suitcase, putting in enough clothes for 3 days. Bernard helped me put the suitcase in the car, gave me a goodbye kiss. "Have a good trip, honey. Be safe. See you on Thursday." Naomi stood at the door, small and fragile. She gave me a quick wave and went inside. I drove down the street, looking in the rearview mirror until my house disappeared from view. But I didn't go to O'Hare Airport. I drove for about 10 minutes to a quiet street a few blocks from home and parked under a large tree. I turned off the engine. The silence inside the car was deafening. I took out my phone. My hands were sweating. I opened the spy camera app. The screen flickered and then the image appeared. It was Naomi's room. It was empty, but the image was crystal clear. I could see the unicorn quilt, the bookshelf we'd organized, the closed door. I was there, hidden, invisible. Now all I could do was wait. Wait for the night. Wait for the darkness to bring with it the terrible truth that I knew, deep in my soul, I was about to witness. The day dragged on with agonizing slowness. I sat in the car, reclining the seat so as not to attract attention. With every hour that passed, my anxiety grew. I felt like a predator waiting in the bushes, a horrible feeling that mixed with the determination of a mother bear protecting her cub. I only left once, to use the restroom at a gas station and buy a bottle of water and a tasteless sandwich. I could barely swallow. Through the app, I could see Naomi's room remained empty. Sometimes I heard distant sounds from the house, the TV in the living room, Bernard's voice on the phone. Every normal sound seemed grotesque, a facade for the darkness I knew was hiding there. When the sun began to set, painting the Chicago sky in shades of orange and purple, my heart started beating faster. Night was coming. The moment of truth. Through my phone, I saw the light in the room turn on. Shortly after, Naomi came in, already in her pajamas. She sat on the bed, hugging her knees. There were no books, no drawings, just a lost look, fixed on the wall. My heart broke for her. She was alone, waiting for whatever happened when the lights went out. I saw Bernard appear in the doorway. "Time for bed, little missy," I heard his voice, muffled but clear through the camera's microphone. "Did you brush your teeth?" "Yes, Grandpa," she answered, her voice small. He approached the bed, tucked her in, and gave her a kiss on the forehead. A perfectly normal, perfectly fatherly scene. But I saw the rigidity in my granddaughter's body. She didn't relax at his touch. She tensed up. "Sleep well," he said, and turned off the main light, leaving only the little fairy lamp on. And then he left, closing the door. I kept watching. The image was now in black and white, the night vision activated. Naomi sat in bed for a long time, a small silhouette in the dim light. Eventually, she lay down and curled up under the covers, facing the wall. The hours passed. 10 o'clock. 11. I watched, mesmerized, the calm and rhythmic breathing of what seemed to be a sleeping child. For a moment, a terrible doubt assailed me. What if I was wrong? What if I had imagined everything? What if Bernard was really just worried about nightmares? Was I destroying my marriage, terrorizing myself because of an unfounded suspicion? The doubt was annihilated at midnight. The doorknob turned slowly, without a sound. The door opened, and Bernard's silhouette entered the room. He closed the door behind him with the same silent care. My whole body tensed. I sat up straight in the car seat, holding the phone with both hands, as if I could enter the scene through the screen. He didn't turn on the light. The night vision showed everything with a ghostly clarity. He walked to the bed. Naomi, who I thought was asleep, moved and curled up even more, turning to look at him. She was awake. She had been waiting for him. I could see the fear in her eyes, even in the grainy black and white image. It was then that I heard her whisper, shaky and desperate, picked up by the camera's sensitive microphone. "Please, Grandpa Bernard, I was good today. I didn't do anything wrong." My blood turned to ice in my veins. Bernard's voice came next, cold as a razor blade, a tone I had never in 10 years heard. "You know that doesn't matter. This is for your education." Then I watched as his hand moved toward her face. Naomi flinched, and the sound of her crying was suddenly muffled, cut off. I couldn't see exactly what he used, but her voice had been silenced. A sob escaped my throat, a guttural sound of pain and helplessness. My Naomi. My little granddaughter, unable to scream for help. My hands were shaking so much that the image on the phone screen wavered. But the horror wasn't over. He straightened up over her. Then I saw his hand rise in the gloom and come down, and then again. The sound of each impact was sickeningly clear through the microphone. I watched her little body flinch with each one. Her sobs were silent, convulsive, racking her entire body. And I watched. I watched it all, with tears streaming down my face, my chin trembling uncontrollably. I kept recording. I had to. Every second of that torture was proof that would put him in hell. After an eternity that lasted maybe 2 minutes, he stopped. He stood there, looking down at her, curled up in a fetal position, sobbing silently. It was then that he said the phrase that connected everything. "And this," he whispered, his voice full of venom, "is for talking too much to your grandmother yesterday." In that moment, the universe stopped. The pain, the anger, the disgust, it all transformed into an absolute clarity. He wasn't disciplining. He was terrorizing, controlling, isolating her from me. He was punishing her for reaching out for help. He leaned down and with a swift movement pulled his hand away from her face. I heard a low whimper of pain, muffled by her crying. "Now sleep," he ordered, his voice still a threatening whisper. "And if I hear a peep, a single sound, I'll be back. And you know what happens if I come back." He turned, walked to the door, and left, as silently as he had come. I just sat there, in the silence of my car, the phone still in my hand. The screen showed the empty room, but the image of my granddaughter shaking in pain was burned into my retinas. The sound of the impacts, his cold voice, it all echoed in my head. The cry I had been holding back exploded. A silent, desperate cry. I bent over the steering wheel, my body shaken by sobs that tore at my throat. I cried for my daughter, who had trusted me to take care of her most precious treasure. I cried for Naomi, for her stolen innocence, for the pain and fear she was feeling all alone in that room. And I cried with hatred, a pure, primal hatred for this man who slept beside me, who ate at my table, who had infiltrated my life like a cancer. I had to get out of there. I had to act. With my hands still shaking, I stopped the recording and saved the file. It was my nuclear weapon, the proof that would shatter his good grandfather facade forever. I started the car, the sound of the engine frighteningly loud on the quiet street. I couldn't go back to that house, not with him in it. To go back to that house would be to admit defeat, to put the mask back on and pretend until the next morning. And I couldn't. I couldn't spend another second pretending that the man I called my husband wasn't a monster. My trip to Dallas was, obviously, canceled. My only trip now was toward justice. I drove aimlessly for a few minutes, tears blurring my vision, until a name came to my mind like a lighthouse in the storm. Robert, my brother. He lived about 30 minutes away. I picked up my phone and dialed his number. It was almost 1 a.m. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice sleepy and concerned. "Sylvia, what happened? Aren't you in Dallas?" "Robert," my voice broke. "I need you. I need to come to your house, right now." "What is it? Are you okay? Did something happen to Naomi?" The urgency in his voice gave me a little strength. "We're okay," I managed to say. "But I found something out. Something horrible about Bernard. Please, can I come over? I can't go home." Of course, Sylvia. Come now, the door will be open. I drove to his house, the video of that night replaying in a loop in my head. Each impact, every silent sob, his cold voice. Discipline, for your own good. Bile rose in my throat. When I parked in front of Robert's house, he and his wife, Denise, were already at the door, in their robes, their faces creased with worry. As soon as I got out of the car, Denise ran and hugged me. It was only then that I realized how much I was shaking. My God, Sylvia, what happened? You're as pale as a ghost, she said, guiding me inside. Robert closed the door and led me to the couch. Sit down, breathe. Now tell me. I couldn't speak. The words wouldn't come out. I just took out my phone, opened the video file, and handed it to him. Watch, I whispered. They sat together on the couch, the phone between them. I got up and walked to the window, my back to them, unable to see those images again. I heard the low audio coming from the phone. Naomi's whisper. Bernard's cold voice, and then the silence that followed his action of muffling the sound. I heard Denise let out a choked gasp, a sound of horror and disbelief. Then I heard a low, furious curse from Robert. The video ended. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with shock and rage. I turned to face them. Denise was crying, her face buried in her hands. Robert's face. I had never seen him like that. It was as hard as stone, his jaw clenched, his eyes sparking with a rage that scared me. That son of a bitch, Robert growled, his voice low and dangerous. I'm gonna kill that son of a bitch. Denise lifted her face, her eyes red and swollen. She looked at me, guilt and pain etched on her face. Sylvia, she began, her voice trembling. I saw some marks on Naomi's back a few months ago, when she came over to play. I asked her, and she said she fell off her bike. I asked Bernard, and he confirmed it, said it was a bad fall. I believed him. Oh my God, I believed him. Her confession was like another stab wound. He had been doing this for months, and he was so good at lying, so convincing, that even Denise, who loved Naomi like an aunt, had been fooled. That's when it finally hit me. The full scope of his monstrosity, his manipulation, his abuse. It wasn't an isolated incident, it was a pattern, a system of terror that he had built around my granddaughter, right under my own roof. The pain gave way to an icy rage. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I was going to fight. We're going to get her, I said, my voice firm, cutting through the air. Tomorrow morning, we're getting her out of that house, and then I'm going to the police. And I'm going to make sure he never gets near her again. Robert stood up, the phone still in his hand. You're not going alone. I'm going with you. The war had begun. No one slept that night. Robert paced back and forth in the living room, fury radiating from him in waves, while Denise made tea that no one drank. I sat on the couch, phone in hand, saving a copy of the video to the cloud, sending another to my email, creating redundancies. That recording was my only weapon, the voice of my granddaughter that had been silenced. I wouldn't risk losing it. The plan was simple and direct. At 7 a.m, before Bernard could take Naomi to school, we would go there. Robert insisted on coming with me. Denise would stay home, preparing the guest room for Naomi, turning it into a safe sanctuary. At 6:30, we were in my brother's car, the morning sun casting long shadows over the suburban streets. The silence in the car was heavy, dense. I rehearsed what I was going to say, how I was going to act. I had to be strong. I had to be a fortress for my granddaughter. When Robert parked in front of my house, my heart skipped a beat. The house looked the same as always. The rose bushes I planted, the porch with the rocking chair. A facade of normalcy that hid an unspeakable horror. Are you ready? Robert asked, his hand on my shoulder. I took a deep breath. Yes. We got out of the car and walked to the front door. I used my key. The sound of the lock turning seemed like a gunshot in the morning silence. We went in. The house was quiet. Bernard was probably in the kitchen, making coffee. Stay here, I whispered to Robert and went up the stairs, my feet quick and silent on the carpet. I went straight to Naomi's room. The door was closed. I knocked lightly. Sweetheart, it's me, Grandma. Can I come in? I heard some movement, and then the door opened a crack. Her little face appeared, her eyes wide with surprise and relief. "Grandma, you're back." "I'm back, my angel," I said, entering and closing the door behind me. I knelt down and hugged her, a strong, protective hug. "We're leaving, you and me. We're going on a little trip." "Leaving? But what about Grandpa Bernard and school?" she asked, confused. I held her face in my hands. "Don't worry about any of that. Just trust me. Pack a backpack with your favorite toys, quickly." As she, still stunned, grabbed her backpack and put a few stuffed animals and her drawing kit inside, I heard Bernard's voice from downstairs. "Sylvia, is that you? I thought you were in Dallas." "Go downstairs with the backpack," I whispered to Naomi. "Uncle Robert is downstairs. Go straight to him." She nodded, her eyes big and scared, but trusting. As soon as she left, I took a deep breath and went down the stairs, finding Bernard at the bottom, his face a mixture of confusion and irritation. Robert was standing near the front door, with Naomi already behind him, protected. "What the hell is going on here? What are you doing with that backpack, Naomi? And why aren't you in Dallas?" Bernard fired off, his voice rising. I stopped on the last step, looking down at him. For the first time, I didn't feel fear. I only felt a cold contempt. "The meeting was canceled," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Naomi and I are going to spend a few days at Robert's house." The confusion on his face gave way to anger. "Spend a few days? Why? Without talking to me? What about her school?" "She's not going to school today." "And it's none of your business why," I said, coming down the last step and walking toward the door. He moved, blocking my path. "No, wait a minute. You're not going anywhere until you explain to me what's going on. I'm her grandfather. I have a say in this." Robert took a step forward. "Get out of her way, Bernard." Bernard ignored him, his eyes fixed on me. "This is ridiculous, Sylvia. What is the problem?" "The problem," I said, my voice low and sharp, "is that I know. I know what you do in her room in the middle of the night. I know about your discipline." His face went white. For a microsecond, I saw the panic in his eyes before the mask of outrage returned. "What are you talking about? Have you gone crazy? She had nightmares. I already explained that to you." "No," I said, taking a step closer. "I'm not crazy. But you are a monster, and your life of lies is over today." Without waiting for a response, I pushed past him, took Naomi's hand, and pulled her outside, with Robert right behind us. We got in the car and Robert sped off, the tires screeching on the asphalt. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Bernard standing at the door, a figure of impotent fury. The drive to Robert's house was silent. Naomi, in the back seat, was huddled up, but I felt her little hand relax in mine. When we arrived, Denise was waiting at the door. She knelt down and hugged Naomi tightly. "You're safe now, honey. We're going to take care of you." Inside the safety of my brother's house, I sat with Naomi on the couch. Robert and Denise gave us space but stayed nearby. "My angel," I began, my voice choked with emotion. "Grandma put a camera in your room. I saw what he did." The tears she had been holding back finally came, a flood of pent-up pain and fear. I pulled her into my arms, rocking her as she cried, her small body shaking with the force of her sobs. "It wasn't your fault, my love," I repeated over and over. "You didn't do anything wrong. Nothing. It's his fault. All of it." When the crying subsided, she pulled away a little, her face wet and red. And then, with the safety of knowing she would finally be heard and believed, she began to talk. She told me that the punishment started almost a year ago, right after my business trips became more frequent and longer. At first, it was just yelling, threatening whispers if she made too much noise or didn't eat everything. Then came the physical punishments. He threatened her, told her that if she told anyone, especially me, no one would believe her. He'd say she was a liar, a problem child, and that I would be so angry I might even send her away. He used trivial excuses for the abuse, a glass she spilled, a not-so-great grade on a test, or sometimes, like the night before, simply for interacting with me. On many nights, he said he didn't need a reason, that the discipline was preventative, to make sure she stayed in line. As she spoke, her voice low and shaky, the pieces of the last year fell into place in my mind like a macabre puzzle. I remembered the times I had called from distant hotels and she sounded too quiet, and Bernard always said she was tired or missed me. I remembered the dark circles I saw under her eyes during my brief stays at home, which I, stupidly, attributed to growing pains or sleepless nights. I remembered the nights he came back to bed after his trips to the bathroom, and how, the next morning, my granddaughter looked like a shadow of her former self with empty eyes. He wasn't just hurting her, he was erasing her, little by little, stealing her voice, her joy, her childhood. The pain of hearing her confession was physical, a sharp stab in my chest, but the anger was a fire that burned stronger. He had used my absence, my work, to give them a better life, as a weapon against us. When Naomi finally finished talking, exhausted, I held her tight. "It's over, my love. I swear on everything holy, it's over. He will never lay a finger on you again." Denise took her to the guest room, promising hot chocolate and her favorite princess movie. As soon as they left, I looked at Robert. The expression on his face was grim. "What are we going to do now?" he asked, his voice controlled. "Now," I said, standing up, the adrenaline of fury giving me an energy I didn't know I had. "I'm going to the police station, and you're coming with me." An hour later, we were sitting in a small, stark room at the 18th District of the Chicago Police Department. A middle-aged detective with tired but kind eyes named O'Malley sat across from us. I told her everything, from the change in Naomi's behavior to the torn teddy bear, and finally, the video. "Do you have this recording with you?" she asked, her expression professional, but I could see a flicker of outrage in her eyes. "Yes," I said, handing her my phone. She plugged in headphones and watched the video. I didn't look at the screen, but I watched her face. I saw her lips tighten into a thin line, the muscles in her jaw clench. When the video was over, she took off the headphones and was silent for a long moment, staring at the dark screen. "Mrs. Williams," she said finally, her voice low and serious. "This is conclusive. This is child abuse. There's no other way to describe it." The relief I felt was so intense it almost made me cry. I wasn't crazy. The validation from an authority figure made it all the more real and all the more horrifying. Detective O'Malley acted quickly. She helped me fill out a detailed official report. She explained the next steps. A warrant would be issued, and they would need to talk to Naomi with a child interview specialist present. She also advised me to go to the courthouse as soon as possible to file for an emergency order of protection and temporary sole custody of my granddaughter. We left the station with a copy of the police report and the name of a family law attorney the detective recommended. The sun was already high in the sky, but to me, the world seemed darker than ever. That afternoon, while I was at Robert's house, calling the lawyer, the doorbell rang. Robert answered. It was a court officer, accompanied by a police officer. They had come to serve Bernard. I explained that he wasn't there, but at my house. I provided the address. About an hour later, my cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered. It was Bernard. His voice was a snarl of pure fury. "What did you do, Sylvia? What the hell did you do? The police were here. With a restraining order, you can't keep me from my granddaughter. I'm coming to your brother's house right now." Before I could answer, he hung up. Panic hit me. "He's on his way here," I yelled to Robert. Robert went to the front door and locked it, sliding the security chain into place. Denise ran to the room where Naomi was and locked the door from the inside. It didn't even take 20 minutes. We heard a car screech to a halt on the street, followed by violent banging on the door. "Sylvia! Open this door! Robert, I know you're in there! Open up now! I want to talk to my family!" Bernard's voice was muffled by the wood, but his rage was clear. Robert went to the door. "Go away, Bernard," he said, his voice as firm as a rock. "You're not welcome here. The police have been notified. If you don't leave, you'll be arrested for violating the restraining order." We heard a thud, as if he had kicked the door, followed by a string of curses. The banging continued for a few more minutes, each one a punch to my gut. Naomi started crying in the room. Then, suddenly, silence. We peeked through the window and saw his car speeding away, tires screeching. That night, none of us could relax. Robert and Denise insisted we stay with them. "You are not going to an apartment alone right now, no way. You're staying here, where you're safe," Denise decreed, and I was too grateful to argue. The battle was far from over. I knew he wouldn't give up easily. He would fight, lie, manipulate. But now I had the video, and I had my family, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was no longer alone in the dark. The next day was a whirlwind of legal activities. I met with the lawyer recommended by the detective, a woman named Mrs. Davenport. She was sharp, direct, and thankfully filled with a contained fury that mirrored my own. I showed her the video. She watched it with an impassive expression, but when she was done, her eyes were hard as steel. "This is our centerpiece," she said, pointing to the phone. "With this recording and Naomi's testimony, his case is practically indefensible. But make no mistake, Mrs. Williams, he will fight. Men like him always fight. They turn attack into the best defense." Her words were prophetic. Less than 48 hours later, I was served. Bernard had hired a lawyer and was filing a petition to contest the restraining order and demand visitation rights. And his argument was exactly what Mrs. Davenport had predicted. He painted me as an absent and negligent grandmother. The petition claimed I was a work-obsessed businesswoman who traveled constantly and outsourced her granddaughter's upbringing. It alleged that I had no idea about Naomi's day-to-day life and that he was the primary caregiver, the stable and present figure in her life. And then came the blow that almost made me vomit. He described his actions not as abuse, but as biblical discipline, a method of correction that he claimed was necessary to guide Naomi on the path of righteousness, and that I, with my modern and permissive views, couldn't understand. "He's using religion as a shield," I told Mrs. Davenport, my voice trembling with rage. "He barely went to church. It's a common tactic, and unfortunately, it sometimes works in certain courts," she replied calmly. "Our job is to make sure the judge sees through this smokescreen. And he will." The following weeks were a bureaucratic hell. Life became a routine of calls to lawyers, meetings, and preparing for the first hearing. The police investigation ran in parallel. Naomi gave her testimony to a forensic psychologist. It was an exhausting and painful process for her, but she was incredibly brave. She told everything, in detail, in a safe environment. The psychologist's report corroborated her every word, describing the classic signs of trauma and abuse. While the legal battle was taking shape, I had to rebuild our lives. Staying at Robert and Denise's indefinitely wasn't an option. I started looking for an apartment to rent, a new place, a fresh start. I found a nice condominium in a nearby neighborhood, safe and with good schools. It was smaller than our house, but it was ours, a refuge. Naomi started therapy 3 times a week with a wonderful child trauma specialist, Dr. Bennett. She was gentle, patient, and slowly began to help Naomi unpack the year of terror she had lived through. Dr. Bennett explained to me how Bernard's tactic of using religion was particularly perverse. "He wasn't just hurting her body," she said in one of our sessions. "He was distorting her morality. By calling the violence discipline and justifying it with God, he was teaching her that love and pain come from the same source. This creates a deep confusion in a child's mind about what is right and wrong, about who to trust." Meanwhile, I was restructuring my professional life. I canceled all my contracts that required long-distance travel. I called my clients, explained I was going through a family emergency, and that from now on I would focus on regional consulting, on projects that allowed me to be home every night. I lost 2 major clients, which was a significant financial hit, but I didn't care. Every dollar I had ever earned felt dirty, because it was earned while my granddaughter suffered in silence. Following Mrs. Davenport's advice, I started documenting everything. I took pictures of our new apartment. I kept the receipts from Naomi's therapy sessions. I kept a detailed journal of our new routine, the breakfasts we had together, the help with homework, the movie nights on the couch. I was building a new castle around Naomi, brick by brick, and every brick was proof that I was the present and loving grandmother he claimed I wasn't. Finally, the day of the first hearing arrived. I walked into the courtroom with Mrs. Davenport by my side, my stomach a knot of anxiety. Bernard was on the other side of the room with his lawyer. He was wearing a suit and had a martyred expression, the look of a wronged man. When his eyes met mine, he had the audacity to look hurt. I looked away, focusing on the judge. His lawyer began. He spoke for nearly 20 minutes, painting a portrait of a devoted grandfather, overwhelmed by the grandmother's absence and trying in the best way he could to raise a girl who was becoming difficult. He used the word discipline repeatedly. When it was Mrs. Davenport's turn, she was brief and brutal. Your Honor, what Mr. Williams calls discipline, the law of the state of Illinois calls child abuse, and we have proof. She presented the police report, the preliminary report from the forensic psychologist, and some photos of the marks Denise had seen on Naomi's back months before, which she had fortunately photographed just in case. Bernard's lawyer objected, saying the marks were from a fall off a bike. In that case, Mrs. Davenport said calmly, perhaps Your Honor would like to see a short video that clarifies Mr. Williams's disciplinary methods. The judge, an older man with a stern expression, looked at her over his glasses. Proceed. Mrs. Davenport connected my phone to a laptop. Bernard's lawyer jumped up, objecting furiously. But the judge silenced him with a wave of his hand. I want to see it. She didn't show the whole video, just the first 30 seconds. The part where he enters the room, Naomi pleads, and the sound of her crying is suddenly muffled. The judge watched, his expression hardening with every second. When Mrs. Davenport paused the video, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. Bernard's lawyer was pale. Bernard stared blankly at the table, his martyr mask melting. The judge took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Enough, he said, his voice low but filled with authority. He looked directly at Bernard, and the contempt in his gaze was visible. The emergency order of protection is upheld and will be extended. Temporary sole custody is granted to the grandmother, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Williams, your request for visitation is denied. Any attempt to contact your granddaughter or Mrs. Williams will result in your immediate arrest. He banged the gavel. We will schedule a final hearing to discuss the termination of your parental rights in 6 weeks. Until then, I suggest you seriously reflect on the difference between discipline and cruelty. Case dismissed for today. We left the courtroom, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. We had won the first battle, but I knew the war wasn't over yet. He still had one last chance, the final hearing, and I knew he would use every dirty weapon he had left in his arsenal. The 6 weeks between the first hearing and the final one were the longest of my life. On one hand, there was an immense relief. The restraining order meant that Bernard couldn't come near us. We were safe in our new apartment, building a new routine. Naomi, free from his constant presence, began to slowly blossom. Little things I hadn't even realized were gone started to come back. Her laughter while watching a cartoon, the way she hummed while doing her homework. They were like small green shoots emerging after a harsh winter. But on the other hand, the shadow of the final hearing loomed over us. Bernard didn't stay quiet. We were informed by Mrs. Davenport that he was mounting an aggressive defense. He was calling mutual friends, old neighbors, even distant family members, trying to gather character witnesses. He was telling a twisted version of the story, where he was the victim of a lying granddaughter and a hysterical wife. With every phone call I received from a confused friend asking, "Sylvia, what's going on? Bernard called me crying." My rage reignited. He was trying to poison the well, to isolate me, to discredit me before we even set foot in court. "Ignore it," Mrs. Davenport advised me. "Let him flail. All he's doing is creating a trail of desperation. We're going to stick to the facts, and the facts are on our side." Our preparation was meticulous. Mrs. Davenport prepared me for my testimony, asking tough questions, forcing me to relive every detail, every suspicion, every lie. It was brutal, but necessary. The most important piece of our strategy, however, was Dr. Bennett. She prepared a 12-page psychological report on Naomi. It was a devastating document. It detailed the symptoms of post-traumatic stress, severe anxiety, fear of male authority figures, and the moral confusion caused by the religious manipulation. The report concluded, in no uncertain terms, that Naomi had been subjected to systematic physical and emotional abuse, and that any contact with Bernard, supervised or not, would be extremely detrimental to her healing process and could cause a significant traumatic regression. The day of the final hearing arrived. The air in the courtroom was even heavier than the first time. Bernard was there, looking haggard. He had lost weight, and his eyes were sunken. For a fleeting instant, I felt a pang of something that might have been pity. But then I remembered the sound of the impacts in the video, and the pang turned to ice. His lawyer began calling 2 character witnesses. An elderly neighbor who said Bernard was a helpful man, always took care of the garden, and an old co-worker who described him as a quiet guy, never raised his voice. It was a pathetic, flimsy defense, and Mrs. Davenport dismantled it in minutes on cross-examination. "Did you ever see Mr. Williams inside the house with his granddaughter?" she asked the neighbor. "Well, no, only outside," he admitted. "So you have no way of knowing how he acted behind closed doors, correct?" The neighbor hesitated. "Correct." The farce continued, but it was obvious the judge was not impressed. Then it was our turn. "The prosecution calls Dr. Allison Bennett to the stand," Mrs. Davenport announced. Dr. Bennett took the stand, calm and professional. She spoke for almost an hour. With stunning clarity, she explained to the court not just what Bernard had done, but why it was so destructive. She deconstructed the biblical discipline excuse, piece by piece. "Your Honor," she said, addressing the judge, "the concept of discipline involves teaching boundaries and consequences in a way that builds character and self-esteem. What we see here is the opposite. The use of physical force, combined with intimidation tactics like silencing the child, is not discipline. It is the assertion of power and control through terror. The religious justification only serves to compound the damage, because it teaches the child that pain and fear are sanctioned by a higher moral authority, leaving her with no refuge, no safe place for her moral compass." She went on, explaining how trauma affects a child's developing brain, how constant fear can lead to long-term mental health issues. She wasn't just presenting facts, she was giving a lesson on the anatomy of cruelty. Bernard's lawyer tried to object, calling it opinion, but the judge cut him off. "The doctor is an expert. Counsel, let her speak." When she finished, the silence in the room was profound. Dr. Bennett had stripped away Bernard's mask and exposed the ugly, twisted mechanism underneath. His lawyer tried to discredit her on cross-examination, but it was a disaster. She was unshakable, answering every question with scientific facts and clinical observations. He finally gave up, frustrated. "The prosecution has no more witnesses," Mrs. Davenport said, standing up. She paused dramatically, looking at the judge. "However, we have one final piece of evidence to present. It is the security camera recording from Mrs. Williams's home, dated March 14th of this year. We would like to play the full video for the court." Bernard's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This video is inflammatory, prejudicial." "Objection overruled," the judge interrupted him, his voice harsh. "I saw the beginning. Now I'm going to see the rest. The court will take a 5-minute recess to prepare the equipment." My heart pounded. This was it, the checkmate. During the break, I couldn't look at Bernard, but I could feel the panic radiating from him across the room. His last line of defense was about to be pulverized. The 5-minute break felt like a lifetime. The court staff set up a large screen, positioned so that everyone, including the judge, could see clearly. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. I didn't want to see it again, but I knew it was necessary. It was the only way to make the judge feel, even for a moment, the terror that Naomi had felt. When the session resumed, the room was deathly quiet. "Mrs. Davenport, you may proceed," the judge said, his voice grave. Mrs. Davenport nodded and gave a signal to the technician. The screen flickered to life, and the ghostly black-and-white image of Naomi's room appeared, large and undeniable. The video began. I forced myself to watch. I saw the door open. I saw Bernard enter. I heard my granddaughter's terrified whisper, "Please, Grandpa Bernard, I was good today." I heard his cold reply, "You know that doesn't matter. This is for your education." The entire room watched in silence as he leaned over and Naomi's crying was suddenly muffled. I heard a shocked gasp from someone in the gallery. I saw Bernard's lawyer turn pale, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. I saw the judge's face transform into a mask of contained fury. No one needed to hear the sound of the impacts. Seeing Naomi's body shake violently under the covers, seeing her silent, convulsive sobs, was more than enough. The silence in the courtroom, broken only by the cold audio of Bernard's voice, was the soundtrack to the horror. The video continued to the end, until the final threat, until he left the room. When the screen went black, the silence that followed was even heavier than before. It was a silence of shock, of disgust, of unanimous condemnation. The judge stared at the dark screen for a long moment. Then he slowly turned and fixed his gaze on Bernard. The contempt on his face was so plain it was almost tangible. He took off his glasses, slowly cleaned them, and put them back on. "Mr. Williams," he began, his voice dangerously calm, "do you have anything to say in your defense after what we have all just witnessed?" Bernard opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He just shook his head, defeated. The judge nodded. "I didn't think so." He sat up straighter in his chair, picked up the gavel, but didn't bang it yet. He looked at every person in that room as if he wanted his next words to be etched in stone forever. "In my 25 years on this bench, I have seen many cases of abuse, many cases of cruelty, but rarely have I seen something so cowardly, so calculated, and so perverse. To use the excuse of discipline to terrorize a child who has lost her parents, a child who should be the object of your love and protection, is an act of unspeakable evil." He paused, looking at Bernard again. "You were not disciplining, sir. You were torturing. You were breaking a child's spirit to satisfy your own sick need for control." The judge picked up some papers. "Therefore, the decision of this court is as follows. Mr. Williams's petition is denied in its entirety. His parental rights concerning the minor, Naomi Williams, are permanently terminated. Sole and permanent legal and physical custody is granted to the grandmother, Mrs. Sylvia Williams." I felt the tears stream down my face, but this time they were tears of relief. I squeezed Mrs. Davenport's hand tightly. "Furthermore," the judge continued, his voice growing even harsher, "a permanent restraining order is issued. Mr. Williams is forbidden from coming within 500 feet of Naomi Williams or Sylvia Williams, their residences, schools, or places of work, indefinitely. Any violation will result in immediate arrest. As for the parallel criminal charges," he said, looking at the records, "based on the evidence presented here today, this court strongly recommends the prosecutor's office to pursue the charge of felony child abuse with full force. And while the sentencing for that crime is not in my hands today, I can tell you, Mr. Williams, that what you did is a crime. It is not discipline. It is abuse." And then he raised the gavel. The sound of the wood hitting the block echoed in the room, final, decisive. Case closed. The tension in the room broke. Mrs. Davenport hugged me. "We did it, Sylvia. It's over." I stood up, my legs trembling. Across the room, 2 officers approached Bernard, who was still sitting, paralyzed. They escorted him out. As we walked down the courthouse hallway, out of the building, I felt the weight of an entire year lift off my shoulders. The fresh air outside had never felt so good. We were free. Naomi was free. When we got to our car, I saw Bernard leaving the courthouse through another door, alone. His lawyer had already abandoned him. Our eyes met across the parking lot. He took a step toward us, his mouth opening, maybe to say something, to beg, to threaten. I didn't give him the chance. I turned my back on him, opening the car door and protecting the space that was now just mine and Naomi's. I got in, started the engine, and drove away from the courthouse, leaving him behind, a pathetic, defeated figure on the sidewalk. I didn't look back. That chapter of our lives was finally and forever closed. Leaving that courthouse was like emerging from a long, dark tunnel into the sunlight. That day, justice wasn't just an abstract concept or a word spoken by a judge. It was the fresh air that filled my lungs, the feeling of the sun on my skin, the end of a nightmare. The war was over, and we had won. Today, 3 years later, our lives are unrecognizable in the best possible way. We rented that apartment for a year, but as soon as the dust settled and the criminal proceedings against Bernard were concluded, I sold the house. There were too many memories there, good and bad, but the bad ones had tainted the good ones forever. I could no longer walk down that hallway or look at Naomi's bedroom door without feeling a chill. We needed a new beginning, a place that was just ours. I bought a smaller, cozier house in a neighboring town. It has a small backyard where I planted sunflowers, Naomi's favorite. My work has completely changed. I reconfigured my company, and now I have a fixed consulting route here in the Illinois region. The long trips are over. Every night, without exception, I'm home for dinner. Every night, I'm the one who tucks my granddaughter into bed. And Naomi, watching her transformation, has been the greatest reward of my life. She's 12 now. She's a smart, sarcastic, and incredibly talented artist. The sessions with Dr. Bennett continued for 2 years, and they were her anchor. She learned to name her fears, to understand that the blame was never hers, and to rebuild her trust in others and in herself. Her nightmares, which were once a nightly occurrence, are now rare, distant ghosts of a past that gets smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror. She has friends. She spends afternoons laughing with them on video calls, and she fills our house with the music and mess of a happy kid. As for Bernard, justice ran its course. He was found guilty of child abuse. Because it was his first offense, and his lawyer argued his advanced age, he didn't go to prison, which, I admit, filled me with rage at first. But his sentence was, in its own way, a prison. He was sentenced to 500 hours of community service, mandatory psychiatric treatment for an indefinite period, and he lost, forever, any rights to Naomi. He can't come near us, and his name is never spoken in our home. Every now and then, once a year or so, Mrs. Davenport informs me that he has filed a new motion claiming remorse and rehabilitation, asking to see his granddaughter. But the judge, the same judge, upholds the original decision. Any contact, however brief, will only happen if and when Naomi, together with her therapeutic team, decides it is safe for her. And that is a door that she, with all her newfound strength, has chosen to keep locked. Looking back, I realized how silent violence can be, how it can wear the face of someone you love. Bernard was not an obvious monster. To the world, he was the ideal grandfather, retired, present, attentive. He cooked, helped with homework, tended the garden. But behind closed doors, in the darkness, the mask came off. I learned the hard way to trust my instincts. Naomi's changes weren't just a phase. They were silent cries for help, and I almost missed them. That camera, that small piece of technology bought in an act of desperation, saved my granddaughter. It gave her a voice when hers was silenced. It gave her the credibility that Bernard tried to steal with his lies and manipulation. It gave her a second chance at a safe childhood. Today, when I see her laughing in the kitchen while trying to make cookies, getting flour everywhere, or when she shows me a new drawing, her eyes shining with pride, I see a child who is finally living the life she deserves. The eyes that carried so much fear, that seemed empty and distant, now sparkle with joy and above all, with peace. And to you, who have listened to me this far, the lesson of my story is this. Trust your instincts, especially when it comes to the children in your lives. Watch, listen. Drastic changes in behavior, especially involving fear, secrets, and withdrawal, should never be ignored or dismissed as phases. Violence is not discipline. Threats are not education. Abuse is not love. Our story, thank God, had the chance for a happy ending. Naomi is safe, loved, and she is healing. But not all stories end this way. Don't let it happen in front of you. Be vigilant. Be the protection that every child deserves. And you, what would you have done in my place? Do you think I did the right thing? Write in the comments what city you're listening from. And if you liked my story, please leave a like on the video so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you for your kindness. On the screen you'll see other stories that I'm sure you'll like. Click on one to watch. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe. Until the next story.